Hello, welcome back to The Loop Talking Tech. Today we're talking about tech and how it transforms the charity landscape and what that means for the people and the organisations driving change. So I'm joined by Hannah Catchpool, our head of non-for-profit and public sector here at RSM. So welcome, Hannah.
Thank you very much, Ben.
Obviously, RSM does a lot of fundraising. I'm sure you've been involved in lots and lots of different activities. Do you have any memorable experiences from those activities across the years?
Absolutely. Love a bit of fundraising and certainly love a physical challenge. I think probably my most memorable would be two that I did with the charity team here at RSM. The first one we did the Thames Path Challenge, which, if you don't know, is a 100-kilometre walk that you do in a day. I didn't finish the walk with many toenails or much of my feet intact. That was quite memorable, but fun on reflection. And then the other one we did was, I think it was last summer, we did a marathon walk across London with a view to stopping at some of our charity clients along the way. So we started at where the Football Foundation is at Wembley Park, and we walked from there all the way to the AAT offices at Canary Wharf. So it was 20 odd miles in a day across various stops along the way, and memorable because at one point it rained and I slipped over on a drain cover.
It's probably a good place to start, actually, with those fundraising activities, because people participating would have raised money for the charities and causes. And I just want to talk to you about tech and how that's affected charities of last year. And one thing I was thinking about was the idea of a cashless society. How's that affected, clients and organisations you work with in your sector over the last, I guess, 10 years or so?
I think it's quite an interesting one, actually, and almost, replace the word cashless almost with contactless, because I think that's been a big part of it as well, if I'm honest. But I would say from a fundraising point of view, I think that it's had a huge impact, particularly since COVID, because nobody really does cash anymore. You don't tend to carry cash. But some people talk about the fact there's a positive impact, whereas if you search for the spare change in your pocket to drop into a charity box, you might have donated a few pennies or 10, 20p. Whereas if you then donate via contactless or your card, you're more likely to maybe give a bigger donation. But actually, sadly, if you look at some of the stats, and I think the UK giving report for this year that's been published talks about the fact that fundraising generally has gone down. And when you look at that by generation, it's gone down a lot, in particular the younger generation, as people don't think to donate because they're maybe not as interested or don't trust charities as much. So there's lots of complexity to donation that's beyond the cash element of it, in terms of how people feel about giving generally, I would say.
I'm just curious kind of how much money would have been raised by buckets in the street.
I would have thought it's never been a huge amount. I think the biggest amounts of fundraising has always come from the organised events, but they were an important source of fundraising. But as much as fundraising, awareness, and it's a way of getting your name out to a wider public as well. It was an accessible way of giving a few pennies or a few pounds. And so I think that charities are looking at alternative ways to tap into that kind of small micro donation form of giving. There are lots of organisations out there that do that via the tills now when you're going into a retail outlet to buy something, and charities that also drive that kind of technology. One of our clients, the Pennies Foundation, does micro donations via digital giving. So if you go to a retail outlet and buy a meal or an item in the shop, and they'll ask you would you like to round up?
Can we talk about the platforms that are now used to often raise money for causes, often online, often fairly easy to donate an amount? There's just so much wrapped up in there that I find really interesting, like concepts of like the transparency around how fees are tackled, trust in making sure you feel like your donation is going to make its way to the end user. But where I wanted to start was these platforms have been around probably about a decade now, but have they transformed the landscape? Have they helped it as easier for charities to raise money because these things exist, or actually has it made no difference? I'd be curious to hear your view on that.
I think it's a really interesting question, and I think the use of those platforms has made collecting donations easier. Particularly popular with individuals that are doing fundraising activities or teams that are doing fundraising activities. And they do allow a really easy, smooth process for donating and then that money flowing through to the charity. But as you say, the bit that is never maybe that clear is around how much gets through to the charity, how much do they pay to be on the platform, Can they trust that relationship? What are the fees involved? And I think that that for me is probably one of the most interesting points, is doing your due diligence on that before you pick a platform. There are a number of platforms out there. Many have come and gone over the years, but it's about, what is that whole relationship look like? What do you get from it? And obviously making sure that the benefits are always going to outweigh the cost. But really importantly, that you can trust that relationship, you can trust that organisation from a reputational perspective, because you want any platform that you choose to enhance your reputation, to enhance your cause, to promote where people are fundraising for you as an organisation, without potentially damaging their reputation.
For all of that convenience, there has to be a cost. It's a software platform. It needs to be developed, hosted, and maintained, and run and regulated, governed. And then one thing I find interesting is the way that if you choose to use one, typically it will break out the transaction fee or their cost, perhaps give you the option to contribute towards it.
And that has been a change. Originally, that wouldn't necessarily always existed on all the platforms, that you would have been able to separate it out and you wouldn't have always known. And I think for many of the platforms, when you donated, you would donate X amount, you would take an option whether you would gift aid or not, and then you wouldn't see the bit behind the scenes in terms of how much the charity would pay in order to be on the platform, in order to make use of it and use it. But that bit is still, could be more transparent in terms of what is the genuine cost and how much of what you donate does get passed on.
And then even within that, there'll be embedded transaction fees for using banks, credit cards, and areas like that, which are typically a few percent, aren't they? Fees for donations. Do you know the fee range for donations? So
Tell me.
Between 1.5%, 1.59%, and 5% of each donation. So you could be making a cash donation.
Yeah.
And actually, because of the way that's facilitated, 5% could go to the bank fees, depending on how it's organised, which
a lot
of people don't know, do they? Although I would then posit that to say that if you were making a cash donation, you had to then employ someone to carry the bucket around, make sure that's securely deposited. So it's not just as simple as tech costs money, is it? It's just a change in where it's being deployed. And I guess, unfortunately, it's a cost of running the charity that means that when you make a donation, some of it has to be on the running cost of the organisation. It doesn't go directly to cause.
Agreed. And those costs always existed. As you said, if you're going to be recruiting people to do face-to-face donating, collecting, and talking to donors, whether that was through a third party or through your own staff, there was always a cost involved to that in terms of how that would run, and the safeguarding measures, and the governance that you put around that in order to be compliant with all the regulations that exist for fundraising, good practice. So doing it from a tech perspective is just a different perspective and a different kind of safeguarding and a different kind of governance process. But nonetheless, the same level of diligence would go into both.
Yeah. But it's big money. I've got a statistic here, which is digital giving is now 60% of all donations. I'm not sure what it was before, but that's, more than half. That's enormous. I'm actually surprised how little is non-digital. I suppose that's beneficiaries. There's all sorts of ways that funds are raised. And then there were 31.4 billion transactions last year. So that's 4% increase of last year, apparently, which is enormous. So there's a lot going on, isn't there, behind the scenes to fund these organisations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's an essential part. Essential part of charities. Charities wouldn't survive without individual giving.
A good time to talk about charities of the future and how things might change. Can we talk about that? And I guess starting with investment in tech, and maybe this is where artificial intelligence comes in. What sorts of things are charities talking about?
This is a really interesting question, tech in charities, and I think an area that lots of charities are grappling with, I would say, at the moment, in terms of what does that digital strategy look like, and how do we get to where we want to go? Because I think that it would be fair to say that all organisations are looking at what do we need to be more effective, more efficient, to operate differently, to engage with our stakeholders differently, better, to have better data for decision making. And charities aren't immune to that, aren't different to any other organisation in terms of the desire to do all those things better and more effectively. And that's not about saving costs in terms of lower staff numbers, but it's about deploying staff to do the more human touch areas. And charities are very human-driven organisations, and that people contact is really, really important part of what they do. So this would just enhance, how a charity operates. But resources are massively tight, because the cost of living crisis has impacted charities as much as it has many organisations, as cost of staff have gone up, cost of utilities, cost of operating has gone up. So finding spare resource in a time when the world is going through tough times, people turn to charities more, so the demand for their services go up. So you have that almost opposite effect of the services that they are delivering are increasing because the demand is increasing. The cost of delivering them is going up, but there's not necessarily more income to do that. And so finding the resource and the skills to do that is difficult. One of the things that we often see is charities that are trying to recruit those skills either within the organisation or on the board, so they've got expertise to understand where they need to go and how they can get there. Because I think that's probably one of the big barriers to tech is what's the end goal? How are we going to use tech? You can ask the same question for AI.
I suppose one of the challenges for any organisation, but especially charities, is like, at what point do you procure that expensive technology?
Yep.
I think it's fair to say if you go and get the latest all singing or dancing expensive piece of tech, it's going to cost more than if you wait. But then you have to balance that against the fact that if you bring it in too late, it can potentially put you behind, damage the organisation. And that's the debate, I think, at play here, isn't it?
And be out of date.
Yeah.
In terms of decision making, are you getting the best data and the best information out of the data you have? And charities are always data rich because they have data on their service users, data on their donors, and so they'll hold a lot of data and the ability to understand that data and predict, and using AI to the fullest extent in terms of predictive analytics. Predicting could be very valuable, but is risky and potentially expensive.
Yeah, and actually is expensive because we sit on these pools of data, and cybersecurity is just so important. I think the prevalence of cybersecurity attacks and probes is everywhere, and it's not just commercial organisations. Everyone's being targeted, and that's another cost, isn't it? It's being borne by the charity sector because they have to do it. There's no way of opting out of cybersecurity. You have to have it when you're sat on that data.
Absolutely, and I think charities are being targeted. Most charities that we talk to, it's not about if in terms of a cyber incident, it's when, which I know we're the same for most organisations. And as I said, charities are very data rich, which makes them definitely a big target, I would say. And then you've got to grapple with all the different ways in which you can mitigate the risks of a cyber incident and improving your cybersecurity, and obviously putting the governance around that. And we keep coming back to governance through today, and we always will, that putting the governance around that, the people, the policies, the processes, and the understanding and the tone at the top is super important. In particular, cyber is one aspect of that, in the same way that tech, AI, fundraising, will be exactly the same, because, understanding it is really, really critical.
But in lots of ways, if charities are data rich, that's a great platform, because we've talked on this podcast before about when you have lots and lots of data, there's an opportunity to do something with it, which could be valuable. But then in terms of procuring leadership of the charity, so trustees and board members, what sort of debates are being had at the moment about finding people that can provide that governance and strategic insight? I'd be curious to understand what's happening out there at the moment.
Probably very similar to what's happening for a number of years in terms of the skills of boards. And in the majority of cases, boards are still run by volunteers. Trustees, in the largest sense, are voluntary. And so they give their time freely for charities for no remuneration in return. And so it's very much based on who have we got in terms of skills, how do they represent us as an organisation in terms of what we represent and our service users, what are their skills, what skills do we need, and then where are the gaps? And then it's about making, I guess, tracking through how you then get from what you've got to where you want to be. And IT is probably one that's very much up there now from a tech perspective of understanding the cybersecurity landscape, understanding the AI landscape and the possibilities around that, as it was and has been over many years around having finance trustees or having legal trustees and having
property trustees,
exactly,
understand how to develop sites.
And having those that have lived experience of the charity's own cause, so that you actually have a relational understanding and empathy for what the charity is trying to achieve. Because, you have to bring all of those elements of understanding into a meeting, as well as the skills that you have as well. So it's about, I guess, getting the right blend of people that work for what you're trying to achieve, and very much trying to get that kind of tech understanding and knowledge on the board is a big part of most charities' focus at the moment, because it's number one risk on many risk registers.
And it's part of the flywheel too, that, the what people, whether you call it the AI trend or whatever you want to call it, the acceleration of the technology does seem to have brought into play a lot of the debate around ethics and use case and safeguarding. And it's just so difficult to stay up to speed with that, especially if you have to go and find, ultimately, you can't go and buy the resource. You have to find them as volunteers. That must be a real challenge for people in the charity sector.
Yeah. And invest time in training. One that we've been sharing with some clients is the National Centre for Cybersecurity has a pack which is designed for boards and helping to upskill and understand cyber and cyber risk, because it's a huge unknown, I would say, to lots of people. So that understanding it means that you can help to ask the right questions, understand where the organisation is going. And if you've got, a brilliant IT director that is taking you on a journey in terms of cybersecurity or even using AI, you need to be able to understand that, make sure that it feels right, that it feels appropriate for the organisation that you're in, and that you're asking the right questions around how that's being managed from a risk and governance perspective, from an engagement with stakeholders perspective, and picking up all the relevant questions to make sure you're fulfilling your legal duties as a trustee. So, using the resources that exist is, I would say, a big part of helping with that challenge. Once you've overcome the challenge of recruiting the right people.
Oh my goodness, yeah. And we talked a lot about trust and the human touch as well. But I mean, is there an opportunity around, call it a hybrid engagement model, the idea that we use technology to boost engagement? Is there anything that's happening out there that we've seen, or are there risks and pitfalls? I'd love to know your views on that as well.
I guess this is almost merging into AI in charities now and how they might use it. And I think there are examples out there of where charities have used tech for engagement, maybe with service users, but it's a really tricky model to get right, I would say, because most charities, as we talked about earlier, function on people delivered services, people delivered support, and whether that's through online mechanisms or whether that's in person, taking that human touch away can be a risk, because it might be less predictable as to what will come out of tech delivered support versus a human delivered support. So definitely that tech versus human question very carefully.
I mean, social media is a great example of that. That it gives a platform, doesn't it, to profile your organisation, and maybe even a touch point for people to donate through those microtransactions we talked about earlier. But then there's that inherent challenge that it's on the social media platform. Therefore, what you do is ultimately tied to whether that platform handles it carefully, isn't it? And you can't control everything on a social media platform. People can comment, people can go viral.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of things around how you sort of go to market as a charity. And social media is as beneficial as it probably is dangerous in some ways, because it can just take one misplaced comment, one misplaced post, or one miswritten post. And again, AI can play a part in that if it's not then vetted by a human potentially, and a mispost that can cause quite widespread damage reputationally for an organisation if they get it wrong. And then you're into damage limitation, which can be quite tricky. So I would say, again, tech, social media is important, particularly as there is a whole generation that digest information through snippets that come through social media. And that's how they will learn and find out news information. That's how they will engage with the world. And so to reach that element of society, you need to tap into it, absolutely. But equally, charities have to be really careful not to enter into a place where they are being digitally exclusionary of people that don't have access to that kind of information. And there are lots of individuals and communities out there that are digitally excluded because they don't have the tech at home, or they don't have tech at all, or the knowledge to access tech, or even know what social media is in probably some cases.
And still a place actually for some people to receive a letter and a personal touch or a phone call, and for some people who won't want to engage that way, isn't it? And actually a very as you think through, a very diverse landscape, and not as simple as saying younger use digital. Far from it. I think a lot of younger people like the personal touch, and because it's rarer, they connect with it, if that makes sense. So it does seem to me like it's become, in some ways, actually even more complicated than it was before.
It's a difficult landscape to navigate because you hear a lot of references to fake news and AI generated posts on social media, and that will inevitably create a distrust. So people might see things on social media and not believe it or trust it. And so you don't want to fall into the category where you're using social media for then people to not believe it or want to engage with it because they don't trust it.
And actually, the corrective action, a simple press statement or trying to put the truth out, isn't sometimes enough, isn't it? And that's one of the other risks that if wrongfully you find yourself the wrong side of that, it's one of the risks of this new technology, the way that social media can be so powerful, and a lot of untruths can be spread very, very quickly and can be quite damaging. Yeah. So
absolutely.
Another thing to think about.
A minefield.
It is. I think there's still positive elements.
Absolutely, there is, but it's about understanding.
So we've referenced AI a lot. So how are charities adopting artificial intelligence?
Interesting question. And we have referenced it quite a bit. I think to varying degrees, I would say, charities are adopting and starting to adopt AI. I think from everything from capturing meetings, minutes and actions, it's kind of really almost admin level of using AI. And I think that's certainly becoming more and more common in terms of use. And I think sort of another area where you can see more use of and people start to think about it is drafting wording. So it's looking for alternative phrases, words that you might use for a publication. Your annual report, you could put in, how do you say we've had this level of impact here, here and here, and, get some alternative words out, using AI. So I think that kind of admin level is definitely something we're seeing more and more of. Where we probably see less use of is the, I guess, other end of using AI. I think people are probably starting to think about it from maybe a grant application point of view. Are you using it in terms of assessing grant applications? That that would be an interesting lens of how to use it, right the way through to, I think I mentioned earlier, the predictive analytics aspect of it in terms of how do you predict need going forward, particular challenges for the service users that you work with. That I would say is probably the relatively rare end of how it's being used. But I think people are on a journey from the beginning. And I think that, Charity Commission guidance has come out. There are loads of sources of support via organisations like Charity Comms, who've got an AI hub. And there's Zoe Amar, who is a charity digital specialist, and she has an AI checklist, which are all really helpful tools. And I think people are starting to embrace those resources now and thinking about, okay, what policies do I need to have in place? So coming back to the point that I make around governance and structure and framework and understanding and tone at the top, it's what policy do I need? How do I train staff? How do I understand it myself? How do I upskill my board of trustees? How do we understand it? And what is our purpose? What do we want to achieve with AI? And then implementing what we can do with it once we understand what we want to achieve from it. And I think that people are on that journey, but I think that most organisations are relatively early on that journey. So I think the admin end is probably where we see most, much less so the kind of the sophisticated end.
But then the thing that strikes me there is we're still going to need that human reviewer of the artificial intelligence, aren't we? And then that inherent pool that if you start using, for example, AI to process grant applications, you'll have to have the right policies in place and the right safeguards to make sure that if that AI misses a perfectly valid grant or makes the wrong recommendations, there still has to be expertise and review to make sure that it's done. And that's a general principle that we talk about a lot around AI.
Absolutely. Data privacy is going to be really high up on all charities' agendas. They've all worked hard at the GDPR implementation since the new regulations came out. And this is just an extension of, okay, so what do we do with confidential information? What can we put in those AI tools? What can't we put in those? And how do we put a wrapper around that to make sure that our people all understand that in terms of what is and isn't appropriate to put in AI, so that we are maintaining our reputation and the confidentiality of the data that we hold, because they hold a lot of personal data.
Yeah, and I would just share, as I my work in our technology sector, we do at RSM, I've been asked to speak across lots of different industries and sectors. And actually the non-for-profit and charity sector have asked the most questions. I've presented more at non-profit and charity events than any other industry. And I would say the people in it take it so seriously.
You do.
More than any other sector, including technology, where actually in technology, people are sort of like, oh, it's AI, we'll get on with it. But actually, in this industry, it's so many questions around how do we adopt it safely, what governance exists, so much care and concern for doing it right,
Yep.
which is not to say other sectors don't care. You just notice it more. Or I certainly have my own personal experiences.
I think that's true. I think they do really care about getting it right, getting it right for their service users, getting it right for their donors, and get it right for their people to protect all of those from the reputational damage that comes when you get it wrong, but also protecting other charities because, when something happens that's negative for a charity, it has a detrimental impact on the whole charity sector. So I'd be quite interested because I know that you've presented at CFG before in terms of AI and charities. What's the most popular question you get asked by charities when you talk about AI?
I get asked a lot of questions about, okay, how do I do it? Where's the practical advice, which I think you covered earlier. I think the main concern from the room is it's so big. It's like, where do you start? Because this feels like, such a big topic that's just emerged from nowhere. And AI has been around since the 1950s. It's not new, but the ChatGPT sort of beta and launch has led to this awareness of its power. And we're seeing it at play everywhere. So I think people are just grasping for the information they need to understand it. And actually, I think the area where people really want to think and discuss is around the ethics. The concept of, for example, if you engage with an organization using a chatbot and that chatbot is a large language model, is it right? Should you disclose that that's not a human being? Is it right to hide it? Is it right to present it as something which is a human being? Is it better sometimes just call it out or to make it look so, unrealistic? And I think that's a area where people haven't really thought about it very much. And I think the other area that has come up has been people saying, well, what do I have to give up to participate in this? How much personal data do I have to give over? I think people are realizing more and more that to participate in this digital world, you have to give up something to yourself.
Yep.
So they're usually being open, very thoughtful questions because trustees and people who work in non-for-profits are tackling with so many different things within the organisation. They want to talk about the big picture, but then do also want the practical advice on how do we implement it. And the truth is it's an evolving landscape.
Yeah.
The question I was going to ask is what resources exist? If you're looking for, you mentioned a fact sheet, information, where to go for the next step practical guidance?
There's a charity digital skills report that's produced annually. That's come out for 2025. It came out in July 2025, which is helpful guidance and got some good tips and information in there. You can absolutely go through the Zoe Amma AI checklist, which is really helpful in terms of adopting AI and how you might approach that. Charity Comms has an AI hub and there's guidance within that.
And what we can do is put those links into the show notes. So if you listen to this, you can go and find them. Well, thank you, Hannah, so much. It's been really insightful today.
Thank you.
And thank you for everyone joining us today. Please check out the show notes and for the links for more insights from RSM. And don't forget to subscribe for more episodes. See you next time.